Okay, well, it's really nice to be here in this virtual room with all of you today. I'm I want to first just welcome everyone to this conversation, which is a part of our Agenda Gen Innovation Webinar series. It's the second in an ongoing series. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Marci Alboher. I'm the Vice President for Narrative Change here at Encore.org. We're a national nonprofit bringing older and younger change makers together to solve problems, bridge divides, and co-create a better future for all. I'm also a writer with a long-time fascination with the future of work. So I'm especially excited to moderate this conversation with three innovators and friends, Ramona Schindelheim, Sherreta Harrison, and Charlotte Japp. They are all so knowledgeable and passionate about these issues. So I want to set the stage for today's conversation. The multi-generational workplace has created several new dynamics. We have potentially, for the first time ever, 5 generations sharing the workplace. If you've seen the movie The Intern with Robert De Niro playing the senior intern who goes to work at a tech startup, that's really a case of art imitating life. People are working longer, they're delaying retirement, they are unretiring, and they're often joining efforts with younger people and working in whole new ways. 40% of workers today already have a younger boss, a number that is only expected to grow. Yet at the same time, our society has become more age segregated than ever. Aside from families, we often have younger people in school, middles at work, the oldest, increasingly in age segregated living communities like the Villages, which topped this year as the US metro location with the highest increase in residents, according to the last US Census. So these realities have created tensions and fueled stereotypes, and it's kind of easy to see why. Older workers came of age in a more hierarchical power structure, often with expectations about face time and job loyalty, notions that seem kind of quaint today. Millennials have become known for demanding workplaces that share their values, and for job hopping and side hustling, what I call /careering. The youngest workers finished their education and may have taken their first jobs in the midst of this pandemic, either masked or with COVID protocols, or from screens, often in their childhood bedrooms. And now we add the long overdue racial reckoning that we are all dealing with. So these things have kind of simmered together. So there's some good news on the DEI front, especially issues of diversity, racial equity, and social justice now permeate every aspect of the culture at work, not just work that's said to be in the social justice arena. Less good news relates to various kinds of workplace divisions. There's widely heralded greater flexibility around virtual work, but not everyone gets to experience that flexibility. There's a new split in the workforce, complete with new vocabulary. We have those who need to be in person, essential workers, those who don't, virtual workers or flexible workers. And I think one thing we're seeing all the time is that the oldest and the youngest at work are struggling in some particular ways. The youngest talk about how hard it is to have their voices heard, how hard it is to get that first entry-level job or their first kind of rung on the ladder. Oldest are often hanging on, trying to stay relevant, trying to reskill, trying to figure out how to kind of parlay often a lifetime of experience into new roles in a rapidly changing workplace. And many DEI efforts don't even mention age as part of the mix. So the workplace may be the place that's best to bridge many of these divides. And I think that's where we're going to center our conversation today. We have a panel of really big thinkers to talk about building a multi-generational workplace that works for all of us, regardless of our age, and a multi-generational workplace that leverages a diversity of perspectives, experiences, and talents that come with being at different life stages. So here's what we're going to do. Our panel is going to dig into questions together for about 30 minutes. All along the way, we'd love you to use the chat function or the Q&A function to share your questions, Duncan and my other colleague, Michelle Gahey, will funnel some questions to me, and we'll reserve the last 15 minutes for questions from you. But if we see things interesting coming along the way from your comments, we'll weave them into the conversation as we go along. So I'm going to start by just getting a way for you to meet all of these, my wonderful comrades here. So I'd like each person to introduce yourself with the same question. What do you do, and what's your connection to this topic? And I'm going to just start on how I see them on my screen. Sherreta.
Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you so much for having this conversation. So I have the privilege of serving as the sustainability catalyst at MetroMorphosis, which is a Baton Rouge-based social enterprise focused on community change. And, you know, at the heart of the work that we do at MetroMorphosis is about helping people identify their shared interests and then leverage that shared interest into working collectively, right? And so when I think about this multi-generational workplace, I think that's what's at the heart of making it work, right? Identify these shared interests and then helping people learn to work together. So I can't think of a better way to spend my afternoon than having this conversation with you, Charlotte, Ramona, and all of you here in Zoom land. So thanks again for having me.
Thanks, Sherreta. And if the other panelists can follow Sherreta and also say where you're zooming in from. Ramona, next up.
Yeah, hello, everybody. I'm the editor-in-chief of WorkingNation, and we're a nonprofit news organization that focuses on solutions to today's workforce issues. And I am a baby boomer myself, and I've been a journalist since I was 19. And I've always had this interest and passion in telling this story about a multi-generational workplace, because I always, and I try to do this in my own role, I like to tell the stories about how important it is to learn from people who've been where we were before, all that great institutional knowledge, and also not only learn from younger folks who are now learning, you know, maybe they're a little more in touch with some of the brand new things that are happening, but I think that's a little bit of a stereotype. So I like to, I basically want to break down stereotypes and tell everybody that, you know, a newsroom, in my case, or a workplace, a factory, anywhere can be a great place to get those voices heard from other people, and they could be, as we'll go into a little bit later, profitable. But WorkingNation.com, again, is just all about solutions. So I thank Marci and everyone for having me a part of this conversation.
Thanks so much, Ramona. And now, Charlotte.
Hi, everyone. So great to be here. I'm Charlotte Japp, the founder and CEO of Cirkel. We are essentially a tool for helping professionals aged 20 to 70 plus connect with each other and learn from each other. It's kind of like networking meets mentorship. And we are really focused on kind of taking the traditional career development service that is usually focused on early career talent and making it available to the 5-generation workforce. And so a lot of what we do is connecting people one-on-one through our Cirkel membership for these two-way learning and knowledge sharing connections. So our members meet someone new every single month, and they get a lot of personal and professional growth out of it. And we can, you know, I'll go into my personal story later, but I'm essentially I have a background in creative marketing. And that was a really big part of my entry into understanding the 5-generation workforce and getting kind of innovative about how we can better service everyone by coming together.
Thanks so much, Charlotte. And I do have to acknowledge that I'm a member of Cirkel, and I look forward to my monthly matches that now come in my inbox with, I usually get to meet someone younger who we have something in common. It's like a new kind of workplace online dating, and you'll hear more about that as we get into the panel. Okay, so I want to start with Ramona because I think you're sitting in the best place to kind of set up the landscape with us a little bit. Ramona, you and I talk about work all the time, and I know you know what's going on with every demographic. And I know you've often said we're not seeing enough innovation out in the world around new models for work and making sure that everyone has a good job, which I know is your motto. So I want you to start with, like, what are the problems currently going on at work that you think we need to solve? And how are they playing out at different parts of the career path, especially earliest and latest?
Yeah, as we all are well aware that there was at the onset of the pandemic, there was a lot of businesses that closed, a lot of business that had to go remote, and a lot of people lost their jobs. And as people started coming back, women still not have come back as in great force as they had before. But as people started coming back, there was a lot of people applying for work, and businesses have been very, very selective. Younger people are not getting hired because they don't have the experience. Older people are not getting hired because they are, maybe too expensive because they have so much experience. So right now, the sweet spot is about 30 to 42-year-old. That's what Generation USA, I think I've mentioned this before, they put out a survey on the mid-career worker. So 30 to 42-year-olds are kind of the sweet spot because they have some of that experience. They may not be too expensive. So that leaves a lot of people out of the mix, and that leaves a lot of valuable talent on the floor that employers are not getting, take advantage of, and coworkers are not getting to take advantage of. So that's kind of an assessment, I think, where we are right now in the workplace.
Thanks so much. So against that background, you're going to get introduced today to two innovative models that we've been championing here at Encore through our fellowships community. So Sherreta, you have become a bit of a spokesperson for what we're calling co-generational leadership, which you live every day. So tell us what that is and how you came to it.
Certainly. So, intergenerational co-leadership is this kind of model that really emerged kind of organically at MetroMorphosis. And so I have the privilege of working with our baby boomer founder. And what we saw in our own work and just saw around the community is that many of the issues that we were hoping to impact and to help people address were by nature intergenerational, right? Meaning that they affected children, they affected working adults, they affected seniors. And so we started to really put this lens of this intergenerational lens on our work. Well, then what began to happen as we worked so closely together, we began to kind of form this relationship that only enhanced our impact making. And so that became this model of intergenerational co-leadership. And what it looks like now is this intentional pairing of older and younger people in these higher level leadership positions, right? These positions that were traditionally reserved for older, more experienced individuals. But what we found was that there was no age limit or age requirement, right, on wisdom and experience, and that people from different generations had something to contribute. And that's only enhanced when they're able to play off of one another and kind of leverage one another's wisdom and experience. And so this model allows them to work together in a way that enhances their own skill sets, eliminates isolation, reduces the whole burnout thing. And so it's just really been interesting to watch this unfold. One thing I'll say about it, though, is that, it's not without challenges, right? You're talking about restructuring organizations. You're talking about finding funding and revenue to support kind of similar positions, or in some cases, the same positions, with this kind of clear division of labor. But more than that, you're talking about shifting minds from seeing leadership as this singular entity, right? Where you have to do it by yourself, and you have to know everything, and you have to shoulder all of the burdens. And when we're seeing, 60% of leaders, CEOs, talking about isolation and stress-related illnesses, I mean, I know that there has to be something different, right? This leadership thing cannot be singular anymore. And then, I mean, we just learn better together, right? I can't think of a single situation where personally and professionally, my growth was not enhanced by being in contact with people from multiple generations. And so that's what intergenerational co-leadership is about. It is about leveraging the wisdom and experience from multiple generations and creating spaces for leadership of all people. Ramona mentioned this idea of salary requirements, and one of the things that I've been finding interesting is that younger people often have these salary needs because they're experiencing a greater amount of student, of debt, right, coming out of schools. And so this older generation is also considered expensive to employ. And then this younger generation is looking to be employed in what can be an expensive way. And what I think intergenerational co-leadership allows for is just the room to play around with what we have as these old notions of salary requirements, right? How do you put a dollar sign on years and years of experience? But also you can put a dollar sign on someone who has an innovative skill set, new knowledge, right, and a passion for the work that you're trying to do. And so I'm just really passionate about intergenerational co-leadership because I think it's the way we sustain the workforce.
Yeah. Well, we're going to go deeper into it, Sherreta. I'm definitely coming back to you. Charlotte, tell us a little bit about your journey to Cirkel, because I think your personal story says so much of what you're trying to do in the world.
Yeah, for sure. And, I nod hardcore whenever Sherreta talks about student loan debt, because it's a big part of my story too. Essentially, I graduated from college in DC and moved back home with my parents, who I was lucky, I grew up in New York City. So I was able to live with them while I started my first job. And I was working at a very young media agency called Vice. The average age at that time, this was 2013, was 28. And so at the time, that was like a really appealing thing. It was like a draw, like, wow, it's really young, cool, it's innovative, it's fast paced. But, the backdrop of all of this is that when I was growing up, I saw both my parents get pushed out of their corporate careers and kind of put into panic mode. And then both of them figured out ways to work for themselves, which, as a side note, is something that we see a lot with our members over the age of 45, 50, 55. And so what happened was I would basically have breakfast with my parents every morning, bring to them some of the stuff I was dealing with in my first job, all of the gray area that you just have to kind of like trial and error because you don't really learn them in a liberal arts degree or even in college in general, because work is work and an office is very different from anything else. And I would kind of bring these questions to my parents, and they would bring questions to me about launching their businesses and growing those businesses now that they were not just doing a skill that they were trained in, but were the marketing department, the finance department, the biz dev department, all of these things that they had to do and be aware of as their businesses were to grow. And so it really was a two-way mentorship, but I had no other model to point to. It sort of was like this unique thing that I had in the back of my pocket, as like a secret weapon. And I knew that my friends and peers at work wanted mentors, didn't know where to find them. And I knew that my parents' friends and other older professionals out there were also looking for mentors, but looking for younger mentors. And that definitely didn't exist. There was no kind of place or repository to find those connections. So those were the early seeds of what Cirkel could be. And we started out just as an intergenerational networking event series based in New York, where I am. And basically from there, we started figuring out, well, actually, these connections that we're making at events could be made on a one-on-one basis why don't we do that? And now we service our members in the US, but also internationally. So that's, the personal story is such a part of this. And I mentioned the student loans just because I didn't have the option to live by myself or live with roommates after college. And there were some hard conversations that my parents prepared me for, which were very focused on asking for a raise because I couldn't afford to work at the company anymore with my loan, payments coming in every month. And so that's a huge, very tactical piece that my dad especially trained me to address and to have that conversation with my boss. And without him, I wouldn't have known the first thing of what to say and how to advocate for myself.
Mm. Wow, thanks so much, Charlotte, for setting that stage.
Can I add some?
Yeah.
I just love to add something to what Sherreta and Charlotte have said. College debt is a huge part of, a problem, and the salary needs. But there's also a lot of young people come from lower income backgrounds, and maybe they didn't go to college, but they're caregivers, and they're part of a multi-generational, co-generational family. 18-year-old, 20-year-old living with, their 40, 50-year-old parents, and that salary need could also really, really help that family. And I don't think employers ever take that into consideration. They just look at, there's this 18-year-old and they may have been a manager at a Walmart, because you can probably be a manager at a Walmart at, 18 if you've worked there for 2 years, but they don't see that leadership skills, or they don't take those into consideration. They look at an 18-year-old and say, well, I can hire somebody, I'll hire someone else. So I think keeping that in mind too is really important. It's what you're saying is so true. And I think this is just another layer.
So Ramona, this just makes me think that, we are stuck in pigeonholing people of what happens at various life stages and making assumptions about what responsibilities, employers making assumption about, the middle people are raising a family. Well, guess what? Younger people are often caring for older people in their family, paying part of the expenses, especially true in lower income communities, in first generation college communities. And then what we've seen is older people are doing care on the other, middle and older people are doing care in both directions, sandwich style. So I think this is a moment where making assumptions on who people are taking care of really needs to be rethought. And I know, Ramona, a lot of your work really is about advocating for better jobs, in all environments. So on that note, Ramona, I just want to, because we heard, from Sherreta and Charlotte a bit about their personal story. I know you and I have had so many stories. I met you when you got this job. So I know you've had this long career in journalism, but when you came to WorkingNation, it was something very new for you. So as a baby boomer yourself, who's had to learn new skills, and I'd love to hear a little bit about your perspective on that, on what does it take to remain relevant and competitive in a job market and in a career that could be much longer than we all thought it was going to be.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I started when I was 19 years old. I was still in, I always joke about this. I'm a college senior. I never graduated. I joined the workforce instead, and because I had an opportunity to answer a phone in a newsroom in Chicago, and learn, from professionals. Again, mentoring was a very big part of my career. Someone mentored me, and I have done that as well. When I was 19, I started out on a manual typewriter, and you've seen all the movies where they rip the wires off the machinery, to read the stories. That's the way I started. But now here I am sitting, talking to, 200 plus people on my laptop computer. So what I've learned along the way, and I'm the editor-in-chief at WorkingNation.com. So all the articles that go out, I push those out. What I've learned along the way is no matter what career path you're in, you have to be that lifelong learner. You need to absorb new skills. You need to keep your pulse on what is happening. And sometimes you can do that on your own. You can take a class, but sometimes you do learn it from people from a different generation. So for me, I've evolved. I've tried to keep my mind open and say, okay, I need to learn the skill because my business has changed. I don't think I'm not unique in that sense. I think a lot of people do. And I think what employers don't see is that we do that, and that we are relevant, and that we are capable of change. How did we get where we are if we aren't? You know, that's such a, I think it's a very key point. How did I get all this experience if I didn't change when my business changed? So that's very frustrating to me, but on a personal level, I've always felt it was part of it. And I've always tried to talk to other people about it and say that it should be a part of their lives too. And when I go to hire, because I've run a newsroom of 150 people. When I go to hire, I try to look at the actual skills people have and not their age. I've hired 50-year-olds and 60-year-olds and 20-year-olds, and it's just what skills do you have to match? And I think more employers need to do that.
Yeah. And Ramona, more employers need to think about why you need the 20-year-olds and the 60-year-olds on the team.
Exactly.
To really keep your finger on the pulse, because, Sherreta, you're going to chime in and I want you to respond, and then I'm going to toss the mic to you again.
Certainly. I just wanted to say that I think Ramona's story is such a great example of why we have to move away from our traditional view of leadership, because aging has changed, right? It looks different. I used to tell people all the time that, I'm going to work for 20, 30 years, I'm going to retire, and that is going to be it. And my goodness, what was I thinking, right? Because I have been working now for 20 years, and I don't think I've learned enough to just do nothing right now, right? And so there are so many other people, there's so many older people who have no interest in kind of that old notion of retiring. They're still learning new skills. They're still, they're still interested in new jobs, right? You talk about the slashies, the slash careers, right? People are, older people are still very much a part of the workforce. And one of the things that Raymond is my partner at MetroMorphosis. One of the things Raymond and I talk about is that part of an aging workforce is not moving on or moving out. It's about kind of moving over. And how do you create this space that allows for younger people to come in, but still is very much open and welcoming, right, to this experience that you use? Because, what a waste it would be for someone to have 20, 30 plus years of experience and then just go home and take it with them. I mean, they have so much to contribute. And so that's one of the reasons that I think we have to rethink leadership. It can't be this just singular linear path anymore. We're not going to make it.
Yeah.
I want to add too, because what you just said was really, I think, a great thing too, because think about your own personal life and look at the people who are in your life, whether they're family or friends. They're not all your age, they're different age, and you get different things from them and you get value from them. They enhance your life. Can you imagine how much they can enhance a workforce? If you think about it that way, it's invaluable.
So Charlotte, I want to pop over to you because you're living in this like intentional cross-generational community. I say you're swimming in that soup kind of every day. And I feel like you're seeing a lot of the opportunities and a lot of the challenges. I'd love to hear, like, what are some of the trends that people are regularly surfacing in the Cirkel community? And along with that, does it give you any tips that we should all be thinking about or perspectives?
Yeah. So a couple things. I guess I'll start with the negative, which is it's crazy to me how much of an issue confidence is across the 5 generations. And it's shocking to me whenever I hear it, because I get to really dig in when I'm onboarding a member into like their career history, all the places they've worked, all the cool accomplishments and milestones. And this is for someone who could be like a couple years out of college or 50 years into working. And on both sides, there's an insane amount of insecurity. And a lot of what we do when we are connecting people and trying to create that even plane for co-mentoring or two-way learning is to bring all of those assets to the surface and to make it very clear what each person brings to the table. And it's amazing to me how some of the most experienced, amazing professionals really struggle with how to do that. And so that's like the first thing that I would say. And maybe it's a cool like experience or practice for those in the audience to just think about like, what are the things that I'm really proud of, and how can I bring those to the surface all that much, more effectively. And actually to that point, a lot of what we're also seeing, and maybe this is ubiquitous, but it's probably most relevant for our Gen Xers and Boomer members, is online presence. And thinking about how, one represents themselves on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on these social platforms, doing so as like a personal, this is who I am, my personal brand, but then also about those businesses. I mentioned how so many of us are moving away from corporate life into launching our own consulting businesses or larger like entrepreneurial endeavors. And it's undeniable that you need to be online. That is your calling card. You need to have a website. You've got to have some sort of profile where people can find you. It's like a safety measure. As soon as I'm going to work with someone, I'm going to Google them, and I want to make sure that it's aligning with what they're telling me. And so that's another big trend where I think it's sort of in that line of communication that we talk about a lot. Like communication is a big topic when it comes to connecting people across generations. But that, when you boil it down, it's about communicating your value and what you bring to the table, as I mentioned, with the insecurity that so many of us have. But it's also about communicating on a very broad level, to the world, introducing yourself, putting yourself out there, which is scary, but making it very clear that you have valuable experience, that you understand the changing needs of the workplace, and what your accomplishments are, that you're willing to kind of pass on that knowledge and what you can contribute to a team.
Charlotte, there's not one conversation about generations at work that doesn't talk about communication style and communication preferences, tools. Can you share any perspective on that?
Yeah, I'd like to share this story, which was, it came out of a panel that Cirkel hosted at Live Nation, which was the company that I worked at after Vice. And we had representation, I think, of all 5 generations of employees at Live Nation. And communication came up, and one of the more senior executives who was on the panel told a story of when one of the more junior team members on his team, I think she may have been only a couple of years out of college, she came into his office, which is a like physical office with a door, and he was on the phone, and I think he was like really engaged in this phone conversation. And when she came in to try and ask him something, he basically shooed her away, but he just kind of was like, like phone, 1 minute kind of thing. I'm sure we've all done that before. And for the rest of the day, this more junior employee never came back to follow up, as he had kind of motioned for her to do. And when he addressed her about it and said, what was that? Like, what was the question? Why don't you come up and talk to me after? It was because she was so like terrified of face-to-face communication. And even like, I would argue probably the phone can be really scary for some people. And so there are generational differences between how we're comfortable communicating, and you have to communicate how you wish to communicate, especially when it's a manager and direct report relationship. So I just think about that instance and how much smoother that could have gone if he had already known that she's not comfortable with just coming into his office for a quick chat. And maybe she prefers, to message about it, like on the internal messenger system. Things that we're using now, like Slack, are really how early career talent are getting comfortable communicating with teammates and managers. And when you have 5 generations, you need to understand what people are comfortable with just to get the work done.
Yeah. And Charlotte, you're just reminding me also how important it is to communicate about communication tools and about communication styles. I mean, we had an issue once. We were working on a cross-generational team, and there were norms, but we didn't really talk about the norms. And this norm was that most people came to these meetings and turned on their video, but there was one person who had very frequently shown up at the meeting without putting their video on. And when I debriefed with that person, he immediately said, oh, I come from an environment where we're doing a lot of student organizing. No one ever puts on their video. I wish someone had told me to put on my video, and that was going to be a norm on this work team. So I think there is this idea that people are coming from different places and different experiences where there are different norms in a peer group or in an organizational setting. And when you're doing, it's just good practice to get people comfortable with expectations. So Sherreta, I know you have many, many stories about lessons from the co-leadership, co-generational leadership journey. And I just want to hear some of can you give us an example of where this is working for you, or even something where, on it, where you're being vulnerable and say, we tripped up somewhere because of this co-generational leadership model. What's coming to mind to really make this more vivid for people?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. One of the things that has really, really, really enhanced our co-leadership at MetroMorphosis is that so when I first met Raymond, I was slightly intimidated, right? And so for those of you who there are a lot of you on here, so surely you don't know, but my co-leader, Raymond A. Jetson, is a bit of a celebrity here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And so I had heard of him and I was slightly intimidated. And so I show up, even with 15 years of working experience, nonprofit management experience, I show up to work and I'm like fumbling with papers because I'm going to make a presentation to him and this kind of thing. And he looks me in the eye in the way that he does, and he says, I would rather you make the wrong decision than no decision at all. And I stopped. Because then that just changed everything, because what it communicated to me, number one, was that we were in this together, right? And even if I made the wrong decision, we were working together. But it also opened up this window of communication where now I wasn't afraid to come to him with something less than perfect. I wasn't afraid to mess up. And what that allowed me to do was then receive the guidance that he had to offer, right? I share that story a lot because I think it's fundamental when you're talking about working across generations, right? You mentioned people come with perspectives and how they approach things. I think one of the reasons we have kind of the hiccups in how we relate to across generations is because we don't leave room for people to be human, and we don't leave room for people to make mistakes, and we don't. And so on the one hand, on the younger end, we feel this pressure, I think, to be perfect and live up to something. But I think sometimes on the older end, there's this pressure to have it all figured out or to have it all together. And that story for me with Raymond was the first of many ways that relieved that pressure, right? He tells me when he doesn't have it all figured out, I'm able to go to him and say, listen, I'm trying my best. I'm not quite sure. Can you help me? And because of that, I like to think that we make fewer mistakes than we would make separately, right? We make fewer mistakes when we work together. And I think that's important across generations. I will say, though, that we don't always get it right. And contrary to probably what our team would believe, we don't always agree on every situation. Number one, because we're different people, regardless of our ages, right? We come with personalities and things like that. And so we're very different people. But there are moments in our relationship where age is a barrier for how we relate to one another. There are just things that I will not understand as a 30-something-year-old Black woman about a 60-something-year-old Black man, right? There are just things that I will not understand. And so I think having the room and the space to share when you hit those speed bumps is important. And Raymond and I have started to carve out time to do that in our leadership. We've started to have conversations that center around, this was very difficult for me when you responded in this way, or something to that effect. And I don't think that's something that people are used to doing in the workplace, but I think it's made a difference for us.
Yeah, I mean, two things I just have to point out, Sherreta. I mean, many people have the experience you just described in a traditional mentoring role, where your mentor might say to you, you know, I want you to feel confident making mistakes. And what's interesting is that you are also empowered to actually make these decisions as a peer and know. So it's more like partners speaking to each other rather than,
Certainly.
you know, so
Certainly.
all super interesting.
I was just going to say, yeah. I'm sorry, Marci. I was just going to say, and it's one of the reasons that we describe the co-leadership as more than mentoring, right? Because mentoring has its place. It is important for people to have peer mentors, and also mentors, I think, that are more experienced and have been around a little bit longer. But co-leadership is not that, right? It really is this partnering and acknowledging this two-way exchange of information. And so, yeah, it's more than mentoring. It's a partnership.
Yeah. So I want to take a little time to bubble up some questions that have been coming in from the audience. And there's a really good one, which came from Josiane. So the question is, how can we convince employers to expand their hiring criteria and retain multiple generations in the workforce? Is this done at the HR level? Is it done at a CEO level? And I'm looking, I know Ramona and Charlotte, you've both been doing some work around this in trying to kind of get employers to make those pledges and to, you know, where do we think the change is going to happen, and who wants to jump in?
Well, I guess I can jump in a little bit. I mean, I have talked to a lot of different people about this issue, including the CEO of the SHRM, which is the Society for Hiring Managers. And he quoted to me, he said, ageism is the biggest problem we have to deal with right now. And I think that ageism goes both ways, though. And so it's for the older worker and the younger worker. And he puts the blame on hiring managers himself, you know, and he says, we have to do a better job. But to expand on that, it does have to come from management and leadership and people who say, you know, I value this person. This is not, I don't need, you know, I hate seeing my personally, you know, no offense to people under 30, but 30 under 30. Where's the 50 over 50? Let's celebrate those people. Let's show the value they have to this co-generational workplace that we keep talking about. So we need to, I think, one, as a society, drop it. I think CEOs have to lead the way, or small business owners, you know, or HR. I really believe it's there. And I think we have to do more of what we're doing here, which is raise the conversation to a national level and not just have it, you know, I've seen it more and more prominent in articles and webinars like this, and you guys are so passionate about it, and this is your mission, but we need to hear it and see it more in our society, reflected in our, you know, the way we talk about a workplace.
Yeah. I feel like, you know, this, I don't want to be depressing, but I've had conversations with people who could be making change, and there's a lot of talking the talk, not a lot of walking the talk. And I know, as you know, I think I went on kind of a spree talking to as many HR leaders and business leaders as possible. It was the winter after George Floyd's death. So I guess a year ago. And everyone was just talking about racial equity because it was the fire to be put out. And it wasn't even part of a larger conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think, Marci, you referenced that statistic where only 8% of DEI programs even include age. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. I think there's a lot of action to be taken instead of just saying nice things because it's what you're supposed to say and it's politically correct. I do have hope because Gen Z is demanding diversity in their workplace. And sometimes you kind of just need to lean into things that are happening, which is that Gen Z has a lot of demands around how they want to work and the flexibility that they want. And the good news is that accommodation works for all generations. And I think sometimes we forget that we all kind of want the same things, but if the squeaky wheel here is Gen Z and they're getting the oil and the grease, then cool, that works for all of us. And I'll also, to raising the conversation, I think business follows culture. So if we can demand and create a culture where it's normal to have a network of friends, colleagues, mentors, professional connections who are all different ages, genders, racial backgrounds, everything, then business will follow suit and understand that that's what we as the public want. So it's not a happy answer, but we have some power in it.
There's been quite a few studies done on this, and the actual business, the results, productivity, profits. It's been shown that a multi-generational workforce is a much better workforce because, and we've talked about this a little bit earlier too, which is the older worker can empower, or they can share what they know, the institutional knowledge, and they can they problem solve because they probably had those problems that they've had to deal with before. But having someone in who's younger can give you a different perspective on it, and so together you can solve it. But I don't think that's out there enough either, that the studies show that for a business, if you hire this co-generational workforce, you're going to be a better business. You're going to serve your customers better. So I really wish that would get out there more and people would act on it.
I want to segue to another audience question. There's a lot here, so I know we're not going to get to all of them. So this is a really important question. Is it possible to discuss the additional aspect of how racial minorities get factored into the intergenerational equation overall? And I just want to say one demographic reality that we've been paying a lot of attention to is as we become an increasingly older society, we are also becoming a more racially diverse society. So what happens is that we have an older society that was a majority white population in this country where the word minorities came from, but now an increasingly majority minority population in the younger generations. So when people are crossing generations at work, they are also by definition, crossing along other identities, including racial and cultural backgrounds. So that is an important dynamic of what's happening at work. And does anybody want to share any observations or thoughts on that one?
So I'll jump in because I think the diversity and equity inclusion conversation, which by the way, and I was reading in the chat, and Marci, you talk about this often, definitely has to begin to consider age, right? As we start thinking about how we create more diverse teams. But particularly in the world of leadership, which is kind of where I am focused, the idea of race, racial minorities and race equity is really a hot topic. And so one of the reasons, again, advocating for moving from this shift of traditional leadership in the singular and then moving to this co-leadership model is because in a lot of ways it creates these pathways and minimizes those landmines that traditional leadership has created for racial minorities. And so we know we're living in the day where you see more and more racial minorities being offered these top leadership positions, but in many times after years and years of being led by white males, right? And then a lot of times it places racial minorities and white women in these precarious situations where now they are expected to be the savior of the organizations and to right everything that is wrong. And a lot of times they're set up for failure and they are isolated and that kind of thing. And so there, co-leadership is one of the ways that you can address that. And so if you can partner people in these leadership positions and provide this kind of environment for growth and development, then I think you will set people up for success, particularly as the older leader or the leader that's been there the longest moves on. I will also say, though, that the co-leadership model, because even though it is focused on age diversity in the leadership space, it is also just by its nature encouraging people to think of leadership in a different way, right? And so whatever you traditionally thought of as leadership, whatever that criteria was, right? We like to think of leadership as something that people earn because they've done something for a long time or whatever. And that's just not the case. We have lots of examples of people leading in youth, right? We encourage our children to be good examples of leadership in their schools for what's appropriate for them. And so leadership is not this thing that you earn just because you've been around a long time, right? And so I think if you rethink leadership, then you open up who can occupy that space, right? And so that was my long-winded way of saying that for this can be an avenue to address that diversity and equity and inclusion conversation.
Yeah. I hate to cut us off on this, but I want to be mindful and respectful of people's time. And I feel like we're just scratching the surface on some of these really important and meaty topics. But I did want each one of you in kind of rapid panel style to give us some parting, try this at home, ways to shift our mindset or our practice around these models. So Charlotte, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I think we've been talking about how we address this question, from the perspective of a leader and the perspective of kind of like Gen Pop, everyone. And I think from a leadership perspective, if we were to think about the future of work with age being a key piece of it, I think we'll be reminded that, as we've all been saying, we are living longer, we will be working longer. And so how we define work for older professionals today is going to dictate and lay the groundwork for what working longer will mean for future generations. So this is like a long kind of project in the making that we're all part of. And then in terms of kind of in general, I think that a big theme here is continual learning and not discriminating where you get your learning from and whom you learn from. So one thing that I challenge myself with is to set a meeting with one person every week with a specific ask for something that I want to learn from them, and that this person is more knowledgeable in that space, whether they are younger than me or older than me. And it was a great way to just, refocus on those connections that I value in my life.
Thank you, Charlotte. Ramona.
I guess I come from this too, as Marci knows and Sherreta and Charlotte know now too, from a point of view about changing the perception of what each generation, and we've touched on this, what each generation brings to society, to workplace, to our lives in general. And I want to keep encouraging everybody to be seen as an individual and not, the sum of their skills and experiences, but not the sum of their age. So I have without ranting, because I promised I wouldn't rant on this, but I look at what is talked about in local media. There's never a discussion about work. There's never a discussion about education for anybody of a different, no matter what their age is. And so that to me smacks of ageism, and it smacks of a lack of interest in us as a society as a whole, because we can fix this problem, I think, if we make people aware. So that's my parting words, are just really, I just want to keep elevating the awareness of this and what everybody from every generation brings. And I hope that, other people will do the same. It's that simple.
Thanks, Ramona. And Sherreta, got to try this at home practice for us?
I think I have several. And so my first one is always to name two, right? For those of you who are in leadership positions, whether it's the CEO, HR, or maybe you are a team lead and you are delegating, always think about naming two people to lead the work that you're doing, because they can learn from one another, they can play off one another, they can share in the wonderfulness and the woes of leading work and leading teams. So always think about leadership beyond the singular. And then something, because I think it pops up in the chat, I think it's always helpful to remember that with any new thing, and at MetroMorphosis, we say we design movements that matter. With any new thing, it takes change. And with something as complex as age diversity and just diversity in general, it is going to take a significant amount of time to see shifts and see changes. And so we can't give up because we don't see it right away, right? We all have these seeds to plant. And so every time that you can, every moment that you can, look for a way to debunk myths, right? To correct stereotypes, to adjust your own thinking. Something very simple that I've had to do every time I say to myself, if I think of a particular person in a generation as being this person, I challenge myself to find someone else who fits that criteria as well. And so when I think about, and I'm a millennial, and when I say, oh, this is just such a millennial thing to do, I encourage myself to think about someone from another age group that will also fit that criteria, because it's really about shifting minds. And until we begin to think of this differently, we're going to be in the same position. So name two, and then challenge yourself to think of someone else who fits the criteria.
Well, thank you all. And by the way, you three are people I always name when I'm being asked for big thinkers on these kinds of topics. So I like the rule of three when possible. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us here today. We try to do webinars like this at least once a month. We will have more in the innovation series, but on other topics as well. And you'll get an email from us tomorrow with a recording that you could share with others, with some of the resources we've mentioned and ways to follow Sherreta, Ramona, and Charlotte, their organizations and their own personal thought leadership. So they all regularly do events that you may want to be a part of, as do their organizations. So I hope you'll check them all out, and I hope to see you in another one of these Zoom rooms soon. So take good care, everyone.